Welcome to the Old Mac Gang Podcast, or OMG, a podcast with a panel of longtime Mac Apple users who want to discuss the most relevant apps and services to age-seasoned users. I'm Marty, an Apple enthusiast and podcaster. I am a 67-year-old age-seasoned user who has a great group of friends to talk about Apple and Apple seasoned citizens. Let's see who's on the panel with us today.
I'm Gary Shirk. I live in Cleveland, Ohio with my dog Molly. In July, I'll be 88 years old. Along with Marty and Peter, who's unable to be with us tonight, I'm a member of the Northeast Ohio Apple Club. I'm grateful that Marty found Bob and Chris of the Tucson Mac Users Group. This afternoon, I'm getting around, Bob. I attended my first Ocala, Florida Mac Users Group, which meet monthly on Zoom. Chris?
Hey, I'm Chris. I've been around the Mac since 1984. Spent 9 years with the Apple user groups in Texas and Dallas and Austin, and then got a great opportunity to work for Apple and support, and spent 9 years there, and then moved on to a university in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I retired back in 2018, and soon after joined the Tucson Mac User Group, courtesy of Bob here, our president, and it's been all since. I use an M1 Mac Mini, an iPhone 16 Pro Max, which you'll hear more about in a little while, and an iPad, and lots of Apple services.
And I'm Bob Wood, also in Tucson. I am a seasoned Mac citizen or seasoned Apple citizen since the early 90s, and have been active in Macintosh user groups both in Arizona and Wisconsin for almost that length of time.
Well, we're going to do something a little different with the show, and it might be a new format for the show. We'll see how it goes tonight. And because there's always kind of the pressure to find out, what are we going to talk about? What is the topic? What is the app? What is the service? What is the hardware that we're going to talk about? And instead, we thought we might change the format a little bit to make it more conversational and more about ourselves and how we integrate using Apple and Apple products into our lifestyle. I had a hell of a day yesterday. I have this new Mac Mini M4, and I got 512 gigabyte on it, and it was just giving me all sorts of problems. And I couldn't get files saved, and I couldn't do all sorts of things on it. And I finally figured out that I had, of the 512, I only had about 4 gigabytes left. And so the files I was trying to move were way too big for capacity. The thing was grinding to a halt. And it was the fact that I've been using this as my daily driver for all of the podcasts and recording that I'm doing. So stored on it was a lot of video and a lot of podcasts that had kind of driven up the storage really quickly. And think about it this way. I can store it on my desktop, which means it's also in my iCloud, because I iCloud share. And if I'm recording things through Ecamm or Zoom, a copy of that video is also winding up in my documents or in my movies on a section on it, depending on what app I'm using. So behind the scenes, I had multiple copies of stuff that was building up that I wasn't paying attention to. So it took me about a half a day to figure that out. And then it took me about a half a day to figure out how to get these files off and then also securely stored, because I wanted to keep backups of all this work in some form or fashion. And so, I had a couple of 2 terabyte LaCie drives that I use to pull some of the stuff off, just to make sure that my device was clear enough for me to start doing work on it. And I used Clean My Mac, and I used a bunch of other ways to kind of clear off any junk and any cache files. So by the time I was done, I got it down to about 161 gigabytes out of the 512. And it seems to be running fine. But that consumed my whole day. And it wasn't the way I needed to spend my day, but I had to because it was my work machine. Has any of that happened to you guys before? Chris, go ahead.
Oh, it used to happen all the time. Whenever I'd get a faculty member calling saying, my Mac is running really, really slow. I can't figure it out. I just grab an empty hard drive and head on over. It's crept up on me a number of times too. And it's one of those things we used to say, always leave 10% of your hard drive free. And if you use a lot of Adobe stuff that's RAM intensive, then, in virtual RAM and all of that, you might want to even leave 20% free.
Yeah.
And so, it's the quickest way to kill a Mac is just fill it up.
Bob, I saw you mentioned that it happened to you too.
Well, yeah, of course. And the way that I dealt with it is my current two Macs, a MacBook Air and a Mac Studio, both have a 2 terabyte drive. So I'm okay right now.
I in this Mac Mini, I have it sitting on a Satechi mount. And this thing about the Satechi mount is that you can put a terabyte, or you can put any size that you want in there. I put an extra terabyte in there. And I was kind of using that as backup, moving things over. But the machine itself was so full, and the memory in it, that I couldn't even move things off of that successfully onto the Satechi. So, yeah, I should have bought bigger. But I didn't think I was going to be using this machine as my driver for all of this video. And I've got a new studio sitting right underneath it. And a couple of times yesterday, I thought, I'm just going to pull all the plugs on this thing and start working on the studio because I need to get work done. But that wouldn't have solved the problem. Yeah, Chris.
There's a great app called What Size, WhatSize. And I haven't used it in a year or two, so I assume it's still around. But it does like a tree structure showing you your largest files. So like all of your video files would just pop to the top, and you could just immediately move those off with a Thunderbolt 4 or 5 or whatever the appropriate cable is, and free up space really fast on a drive. And it's, Apple doesn't really provide anything like that. And so, emptying caches and stuff really won't free up that much space very quickly.
Yeah.
But, your big file, or else in the Finder, you just search on, show me all my files that are over 5 gigs or even 1 gig. And usually that's going to pull up.
I couldn't even get the Finder to do anything. I mean, it was like, for a while I couldn't figure out, is this the beta that's messing with me? And then when I finally figured out it was the size. Yeah, I just looked at, they have another one called, I'm not even sure what size still exists. But because I just looked for it in the app store, and instead what came up was Disk Space Analyzer, a $9 app with 6 ratings on it, and it's supposed to help recover disk space. There are some other ones that I've seen that look like those targets, that supposedly can help you with that. But I'll put some ideas in the show notes when we get to it.
That might have been the one I used, Disk Space Analyzer. Yeah.
I will, like I said, I'll put a couple of them in the show notes once I find them. Anyways, let's talk about what we're going to do tonight. Very simple arrangement. Each of us has brought a question, and each of us are going to answer each other's question, and then we will answer our own. So I'll start, and the order would be for me to tell you the question, then Chris has his first answer, Gary comes in next, Bob, and then I come back and tell you what my answer is. And then we go on to Chris's question after that. So if you were limited to using only one Apple device that you own, what would it be?
Okay, well, I actually had an immediate answer to this. And this happened back around 2016. One of our professors was a very well-known quantitative mathematician, I guess, Susanna Loeb. She used to do work for Governor Jerry Brown on advising him on quantitative education information in California. And she was a PC person, being a quant, not surprisingly back then. And I got a call that she had a question on her iPhone. So I thought, well, this ought to be interesting. And I went upstairs and she held up her iPhone and said, "Why do we still call this a phone?" And I thought about that today. I mean, it still has an impact on me 9 years later. But I was realizing at the time that I had this little merry-go-round with Christmas cards every year because Apple Contacts had this diabolical way of like losing my kids' current addresses and putting in old ones. I'm sure there's a little gremlin in there somewhere that does that, right? And so, but I discovered that my phone was the best source for everything. It always had everything correct, and it was always ahead of my Macs. And if we think a little bit about it, it's not too illogical because iOS was definitely in the driver's seat at that point. And we know why now with things like Vision OS and and Apple Silicon and everything else that we didn't know back then. But yeah, it's my phone, and I use it for Duolingo because I have the Pro Max model. I have an iPad, but the iPad app isn't as good as the iPhone app, and I just find there's lots of things now. My biometrics all work on the iPhone because of facial recognition, and like for instance on my Mac, I can't hand off to the iPhone anymore when I want to do Apple Pay on the Mac because they don't have a keyboard with the fingerprint ID. And so, but anyway, long story short, it's just the phone is the device. Now, this doesn't say a lot for, processing my photography. I will admit that. But it's probably the device I use the most. And it's just all the time. It's just always in my pocket. It's my camera. I tend to call it my camera now because I do so much iPhone photography, which is a whole other thing. But so, yep, that would be my answer.
Okay, Gary.
Excuse me. Well, mine is my Mac Mini. Excuse me. Although I'm wearing my watch all the time and my phone is around, but primarily my day is on my Mac Mini. I can do the little bit of accounting I do. I can watch YouTube. I can write. So the Mac Mini is my really primary machine that I use most of the day, almost all the day.
Okay, Bob.
Chris?
Bob, microphone.
I would have to say that it would be my Mac as well. Probably a MacBook Pro and my iPhone Pro and my Apple Watch Ultra. I can't be held down to just one. It's the family that I have to have.
Taking the slick way out of a difficult question. I had to think about this because, especially since you guys had said the Mini, it's sort of like, yeah, that's my driver. That's the one I use all the time. But I can't take it out of my house and walk around with it and use it. But the phone, I can't do the phone because the phone just is too small for me to do any serious productivity work on it. So I landed on the MacBook Air, particularly the new MacBook Air that I have. I like it because, it's small, it's light, and it's a full computer. And if I need to get messages, I can get messages on it because Messages is set up on it. If I need to make a phone call, I can do that too with FaceTime. And I don't shoot a lot of pictures like Chris does. So pictures are not a thing for me or a need for me as much. I guess I can have Chris and Gary and Bob send me pictures and I can put them in my iPhoto or photos, I guess, to look at them. But I'm just not a picture shooting kind of guy. So after much thought, well, actually, it was the first thing I came to, and then I kind of reflected on it and said, yeah, it's got to be the MacBook Air, particularly with the new high-speed capabilities that it has. I'm not sure I need to lug around a MacBook Pro from weight and from comfort, and there's not things I do with it that I can't do with my Mini. So that's my answer. Chris, what's your question?
Okay, my question is, given the increasing complexity of Apple technology every year, how do we keep our computing experiences simple and productive, while at the same time appreciating the incremental improvements and taking advantage of them in Apple's hardware and software?
Okay. Gary, you're first up on this.
Well, my first thought is we associate with people like we are associated with who are showing us or helping us with the latest of the technology. It also means, of course, we have fairly recent hardware and are running the most recent software. So I think, Chris, that allows me at least to be what I would call, from the way I use it and need it, or however, to be on kind of a leading edge. So it allows me to be current, and the new stuff that's coming out, I get to poke around and find out how it works.
Bob?
Well, although I'm not really a fan of Hillary Clinton, I would have to say it takes a village. You know, we all have needs that. The big problem is sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And so I use online Apple News, YouTube tutorials, Apple-centric podcasts such as this, and Mac user groups. Just today, we had a difficult question on our forums for the user group. And, you know, as I always say to people, you're always going to get an answer. And it might even be right. And there are people, I also say that you may come to a meeting, be it Zoom or in person, and think, well, I don't know anything. But you know something that the guy next to you or the gal on the other side doesn't know. And we're all here to share in that. So there's plenty of people and information around that you can use to help you solve your issues.
Yeah, for me, it's an interesting question that things get more and more complex. What I try to do is, like I've already told you, a camera is not my thing. So some little bobs in the camera or little things in the camera that it can do doesn't really necessarily impress me that much. So I probably won't be drawn to learning about that, but I'll find something in each new device as it comes out that I'm interested in learning about and use it. And I would say now for me, it really is, for most of the devices, Apple Intelligence. So, that's come across cross-platform for a lot of new devices. So that's something I'm interested in learning about. The other thing I try to tell myself is I'm going to learn one new thing every once in a while. And I think Ecamm's an example of that in terms of me starting to use Ecamm instead of using Zoom for the video recording. I think my next thing is going to be Notion. I've tried that a couple of times and still can't get the hang of it. So I'm going to try and focus on some videos that will teach me how to use it so I can use it all the wonderful ways people tell me that Notion can be used. So I get interested in certain things and will stick on that until I have an opportunity to learn about it. I'm on a bunch of podcasts, so I don't listen to a lot of podcasts outside the ones that I'm on with a bunch of folks who know a lot about Mac and Apple stuff. There are a few that I'll listen to because I just don't have time during the day or a commute or freedom from work to be able to listen to stuff. So there are some short ones like Mac OS Ken that keeps me up on the news and what's going on with Apple on a daily basis. And Clockwise is another. And I get to Mac Break Weekly. I used to get to it a lot more, but I get to it occasionally now. So podcasts, yeah, but I'm on a couple of podcasts that are pretty Mac centric, including this one. So it's, so I get that information. It kind of leaks into my environment all the time. So, Chris, what's your answer?
My answer, my hint was Apple user groups, which of course we all know and love. And when I retired from doing tech support, my world changed a lot. In other words, instead of having, 10 minutes here, 15 minutes there to catch up on Mac rumors or, read something or this or that all changed. And I went to more project-based things that interest me, in my day. And so I lost that sort of time to catch up on the latest tech news. And so when I met Bob on jury duty, he came over and said, "I admire your watch." And we both had the same Apple Watch, and that started a great friendship, which is one of the reasons I'm here. By the way, I got thrown off the jury, but that's another long story. In any event, the other one I think I would mention here, tonight in this time frame is ChatGPT, and I use that kind of, I use that metaphorically because it might be Gemini, it might be Perplexity, it might be Claude, it might be whatever one you like using. But I'm finding it just really helpful when I've got a question like I couldn't figure out after putting a fresh filter in the air purifier behind me here why the red lights are still on. You can probably see them down there in the picture. It's still on. But I asked ChatGPT and it just came out and said, "Here's the answer." Now, unfortunately, the answer didn't work. It may have something to do with the hardware in the unit. I don't know. But it's a wonderful resource, and I really recommend it. And I have friends that will send me an involved tech question. The deadly, I just have a short question. You always know those are going to take 45 minutes. But so I'll run it through ChatGPT and just copy and paste it and email it right back. And maybe next time they'll use ChatGPT instead of calling me. So I guess that would be my answer.
Okay. Then we go on to Gary's question. Gary, what's your question?
Well, Gary's was having a hard time coming up with a question. But my question maybe is that I'm asking you the question, or for a suggestion, each of you. What would you suggest as maybe a tool for, we're calling ourselves seasoned Mac users? And what do you have any suggestions for me of what, and others like me, that we could use, back to your word, daily driver, Marty, that we're all having we have a daily driver here, whatever the computer we're talking about we're using. But do you have any suggestions of, say, applications that would help us or that I may not know about, something new, a new idea that you think I or people like me would be interested in?
And Bob gets the first response on this one.
Okay. Just today, I've used AI to help me write my column for my local Mugs newsletter. And thanks to Gary, who is a big proponent of Perplexity, it came up with much of the column. I just have to kind of work around a little before, a little after, and I'll have a column. I also used Apple CarPlay to navigate, and I used an Apple CarPlay using maps to navigate, even to places that I know where they are and I know how to get there. Because if I am using that navigation, I don't have to think about, do I turn at 2 streets down or 3 streets down? Because the navigation will tell me that. So I can use more of my attention to look around and make sure that there isn't pedestrians crossing or somebody coming up behind me or a bicycle rider or so forth. So even though I know where I'm going, I still use maps and Apple CarPlay to navigate. I also used my Apple Watch today to help me track my workouts and make sure I get my steps and my calories and my minutes in. So Gary asked, what about an application? There's an application that I use that I think is terrific. It's an application for your phone, and it's called Any List, ANY List. And it is ostensibly a grocery shopping list maker, but you can make all different kinds of lists. We both have it. I have it both on my phone and my wife's phone. And should we ever go to the grocery store together, one of us takes off to the left, the other takes off to the right. And as I pick up the celery from the produce department, I touch the name celery on the list, and it goes away not only from my phone, but from my wife's phone. Another thing that we use it for is to have a list of our medications. At this age, I think we all have a handful of medications or more. And heaven forbid, one of us needs to go to the hospital and they're non-responsive. If I were in that position, my wife would have a list of my medications, because one of the things the doctor's going to say, well, what meds is he on and what are the dosages? So we have that available to each of us for my meds and her meds. Any List is a great application. It's free, but if you pay the annual fee, which is pretty reasonable, I think it's $12 a year or something, you can also get it on your Mac. So you can edit your lists right on your Mac. And like Gary, I'm a real Mac-centric kind of guy. So that's what I have, Gary. I hope it helps you out.
I have to do an endorsement for Any List, but unlike Bob's wife, who goes off to the left and he goes off to the right, Bob's wife finds him. I send my wife off to the left and I go off to the right, and she picks up a few things, and then I have to wander around the store and find her because she's been distracted by something else or something. So, but Any List is a great app. Any List is a great app. It does exactly what you said, Bob, and we use it just for shopping primarily. And we can put things on the list. So if I go and she doesn't come with me, I've got what she wants me to get from the store too. It is really superb in terms of that kind of list. I think my daughter's on it too, and occasionally she'll say, "Oh, I'm going to cook this for you this Sunday night. Here's the ingredients you need to pick up at the store for me." So she can add things in that way too. It's pretty cool. I'm going to go back to mine, and my choices I'm thinking of the two things that I use a lot. You've already mentioned ChatGPT, and I use it for all sorts of work that I do. But something that I find, and I'm queuing in on the words helpful as well as enjoyable, is Reddit. I've started using that well, I've been using that app for a while, but you can, with that app, have a section of there's things called subreddits, which are topics, and people will post to the subreddits on particular topics that you're interested in. So there are Mac, Apple, Vision Pro topic areas. There's humor, there's dad jokes, there's celebrity news. There is facepalm, which is stories that you can't believe that person is that stupid. So from the information to the entertainment, and even onto the news, and people will post links to news articles, and then other folks will comment on those news articles. So it is really it kind of replaced my information app in a lot of ways, and some of it's questionable, but some of it is also really good. And so when a new version of a new version of software comes out, I will go to Reddit and see in Vision Pro if anybody's put that new version on it and what's their reaction to it. It's a really good source for that. The other app I'd say is Discord, which is similar, but it looks a little more gamification. I kind of prefer Reddit than having to go through different Discord groups to find information on it. But yeah, that's sort of my in between work and play. Get up in the morning, read the news, and then I'll go to Reddit to see what's kind of new in my feeds of the different groups that I've selected that I want to have news about. And then there's you can switch it to what's popular right now, which is what everybody's posting about, or you can switch to news, which is supposed to be functioning just around what's going on in the news and stories and reactions to that. So I've used it quite a bit and use it quite a bit for that helpful as well as enjoyable kind of app, Reddit. Chris.
Well, the two apps that I might mention here, but first of all, thank you, Bob, for mentioning about CarPlay. I thought I was just getting lazy in my older years here by putting in directions every time. And one of the cool things is, if you put in the address of where you're going in the location, it'll come right up in maps when you get in the car and say, do you want directions? Boom, you just click it, instant directions. The other thing, of course, is the watch will make a turning noise like a blinker, and it's very helpful. So I like both of those a lot. But the two apps I were going to mention, first of all, for writers, there's an app called Scrivener, and that's Scrivener, and it's by Literature and Latte. And I don't want to speak too much for them. I should have checked their website, but it looks like it was designed to write a dissertation or to write a novel, where you not only had what you were writing, but you had pictures, outlines, snippets, whatever, and you could put an entire writing project into a Scrivener file. And it's, for long form writing, it's fantastic. The other one I want to mention is my favorite, Duolingo. Now, I will admit that some people like to do crossword puzzles. I like to do languages. So, back in high school, I had learned French, which I recently added back to my Duolingo list, and I'm having a ball with it. It's all of a sudden there's vocabulary from, 60 years ago that starts reappearing, and it's just a lot of fun. So, it's something that you can either learn a new language and there are a lot of language apps out there, but I just think Duolingo is fun. It is a little bit on the gamified side, and I don't always subscribe to all of the game stuff, but, I do as much as I can, and it's just been really fun. I've got 3 languages in there now that I'm mostly doing Spanish and French at this point. I was also doing Russian because I learned that in the Army. But that's been fun to go back to, because you talk about how languages change. A lot has changed in the last 50, 60 years in terms of the way how languages are used. So that's a lot of fun. But so Scrivener and Duolingo, those would be my choices.
Gary, you get to answer your own question.
Well, interesting about any list. Peter may have mentioned it somehow at a meeting, and I too have used or use any list, and not only for groceries and memory. I've used it a few times for just making a checklist. If I only be not even to change the oil, for example, on a car, I have a list of, so I'm only going under the automobile one time. And then Marty, you sort of turned me on to Perplexity, which I've shared, as you've done, with a lot of people. I use that a lot. And then recently, because you've mentioned that also, I've been working and trying to use ChatGPT for more projects. And then I read the Atlantic, I think, and the New Yorker, and now I've noticed there's news over audio so I can both listen and read if I want articles short. They tell you how many minutes they are. And then Chris lastly turned me on to in writing, because I mentioned about dictation before, double clicked. Chris helped me set up a control. I hit the control key twice, microphone comes up. Then I can go back. I'm grateful for that. So that, and then Chris also turned me on to Proofreader, which is in Messages, and so that's been very helpful, Chris, finding you can be a little casual because Proofreader will catch your mistakes. And then I've also used on the Mac where you click on, the S lady, and she'll give you all kinds of other information. So that's the answer to my own question.
Okay, last round of questions, and we start with Bob.
Okay, my question is, what would you have as desert island Apple gear? And this is presuming that you have no internet connection or there isn't an Apple iSeaplane floating in the bay. Marty?
No internet? I need a sharp, pointy object to take my own life with. I really had a hard time trying to figure this one out. And the only thing that I could say would be, I'm assuming that there's electricity, because any device that we use, so there's electricity. Well, I would say it would probably be the largest iPad I could find with as many downloaded shows and movies that I could fit on it. And I got about 600, 700 films that I purchased through Apple. So it better well be a damn big iPad, because that would be my primary source of entertainment with no internet to be able to connect to do anything else with the device. So yeah, music, movies, TV shows, all of that would have to be downloaded on the device and ready for me to be able to watch them while I take my own life, because there's no internet. Chris.
Well, I'm gonna side with you on this one, Marty, and I would take my iPad and probably an external USB-C drive, and I would, first of all, I might actually read all of those books I've bought from Amazon that are in my Kindle library, and I have audio companions for a lot of them too, and I fully and which is really fun, by the way, because you can have the audio, or you can read the video, or you can do both at the same time. And so it's kind of a cool thing. Um, and I've got all sorts of wonderful, like MacArthur's autobiography. I don't know, it's biography. I don't think he wrote it himself, but I would, I could keep myself busy for at least until the rescue ship arrived without any problem, probably just on my Kindle library.
Okay, Gary.
Well, Bob, you've given me some thought. So you're saying it's what device you would take to an island and how long would you be there?
Until rescued, like Gilligan's
Oh,
Island.
rescued. You know, and there would be, Marty said electricity, but I'm assuming there would be no ability to get a Starlink satellite. If that were the case, maybe I really would not take really anything or not even a watch, maybe. Maybe you just go there and kind of reflect or meditate, assuming you would be rescued. But it would be like, what if you would go into silence? What would that be like, to be completely away from all this Apple stuff that we seem to be so connected to that, when my internet was down, it was like, or once something was happening in my Mac, I had to get a backup. But your question made me think that maybe just let it go. Okay. Silence, listen to the waves, sunshine.
Drive yourself. Yeah, drive yourself crazy. Yeah, okay, start talking to yourself. Painting faces on washed up balls that, and
but could you live for, just live for a week, assuming you were going to be rescued in a week? I've heard people gone to places that there are no newspapers or television or radios, and they made out just fine.
Okay. Yeah, I did that once when I was younger. No, there's a condition in any travel or trip that my wife and I take. There has to be internet available, and we've gone to some fringe areas, and it's been poor internet, but there is internet available. Bob, you get to answer your question to end it off.
Well, okay. To Gary's point of having nothing there, I think that if I were in that situation, I'd end up being the Unabomber. But I would probably take a MacBook that had books and videos and music on them that I could read and entertain myself, just as Marty and Chris said. But I would also, well, this is kind of a cop-out. I'd want an iPhone with a sat connection. That way you could get rescued in a few days rather than a few years like Gilligan.
This is the second question you've really kind of gone on the fringe with, We said one item, you gave us 5. You said no internet, you gave us a sat link.
Only 3.
Well, thanks for doing this round robin tonight. This is fun and different, and maybe we can all challenge ourselves to come up with new questions next time we do this, and maybe we'll do it next time, just to get an idea of how we see the world around Apple products and apps that we use. Gary, I did some quick looking. The Atlantic and the New Yorker are both part of News Plus. So you can get those prescriptions. You can get those subscriptions. Now, if you're on an island with no internet service, you're never going to get them delivered. But you can still, that's part of the Apple Plus package of the magazines that are available. In News Plus, excuse me. I was looking in News Plus. So announcements. We have Macstock 9 coming up in about 90 days, if I think that's right. It's 3 days, July 11th, 12th, and 13th, 2025. It's in Woodstock, Illinois, which is north central Illinois, about 40 minutes outside of Chicago. So flights into Chicago will get you there. Flights into Rockford will get you there. It's a nice little small town that actually Groundhog Day was filmed in, the movie Groundhog Day, as a replica of where the real Groundhog Day is. And it's a great conference. It's a group of presentations all day long. There'll be workshops or more workshop-y type things that are 90 minutes, and then there'll be 45-minute presentations. Great group of folks gathered around. Bob was there. That's how I met Bob. And then, the connections just keep going from that. This year, I think Bob's coming. I know Gary's going to be there. And I'll be there with my son. So I'm bringing my son. We're going to do a presentation on gear and travel gear. And I'll be doing something on the dreaded Apple AI in terms of a workshop. Boy, did I predict a winner when I said, yeah, all that Apple AI stuff will be out by May. So I'm hoping Cupertino speeds it up a bit. You can check out, there's a code that we have that'll give you $50 off by just, when you check out, PodTalk50 is what you do for the discount code. If you want to find out about it, just go to Macstock Conference and Expo, all one word, Macstock Conference and Expo.com. You'll find about the conference, and you'll also find out its location and its hotel and how you can get all that set up. The whole conference is going to be in one hotel. So there are other hotels around the area, but there is the convenience of the conference being in a hotel. And frankly, the hotel costs are extremely reasonable in terms of that. So hope to see you at Macstock, and we might even do part of a show from there. I don't know. People will bring their gear, and folks will be doing their shows from there in the evenings and other times. So let's wrap up this episode, guys. Any news or anything you want to share before we say goodbye? Well, silence is consent. Our next live episode will be Wednesday, April 16th at 9 p.m. through YouTube, where you can watch this crew at youtube.com/@OldMacGang. You can always pick up the podcast or video later if you miss a live show. Share it with your Mac user groups. If you're a Mac user group listener, we are experimenting, doing some fun stuff, and would love to have more people listening and watching as we can. Our music bed is by Philip Gross, Marrakesh, courtesy of the Free Music Archive. More information about this podcast and others can be found at our website, thepodtalk.net. Thanks to the group, Gary, Chris, Bob. Peter is on the road checking out some film that his son did, and will most likely be back next week. And thank you for being part of the Old Mac Gang. We'll see you next time.